If you design a bike to descend well, it stands to reason it won't be the best setup for climbing. That's because the ideal requirements for one are completely at odds with the other. Finding the best compromise is something that riders and designers have been wrestling with for years. But a few brands have figured out ways of letting you change the shape of your bike to suit the terrain at the push of a button, all with the aim of giving you the best of both worlds.
That's the theory, but does it actually make you faster in the real world? Today we're going to find out by conducting a series of timed runs. To help us, we've got two of the new Canyon Strives, boasting the latest version of their clever Shapeshifter system. Now this is very much an enduro machine with 170mm of travel up front, 150mm out back, a full carbon frame and aggressive geometry. But at the flick of a switch, it's a trail bike as well. So what happens when you change modes?
Well, you know James Bond had that Lotus Esprit that turned into a submarine at the push of a button?
Yep.
Well, it's a little bit like that without the getting wet bit. With Canyon's Shapeshifter, the bike completely changes attitude. That's because a mechanical linkage and a hidden piston completely alter the position of the shock. In turn, this changes a number of parameters. For one thing, the geometry shifts. So in the XC mode, the dynamic head and seat angle steepen by 1.5 degrees and the bottom bracket raises by 15mm. This shifts your weight further forward, puts you in a more efficient position over the bottom bracket and helps keep the front wheel down on steep climbs. And it also gives you more ground clearance, so you can power up rocky steps or through narrow ruts without clipping your pedals. So it reduces the travel by 15mm and it changes the kinematics of the suspension. The anti-squat increases, so the bike doesn't compress as much under power, and there's less leverage on the shock, making the suspension feel firmer. Really is a comprehensive change of attitude that should make the bike more efficient both up and down. To put this to the test, James and I are going to do some back-to-back runs.
Each of us will do 3 downhill runs with the system in DH mode.
And then we'll do another 3 where we shift to the XC mode for the flat section in the middle to see if that makes a difference to the times.
After that, we'll shift to our climbing test. Here we'll do 2 ascents in the DH mode and 2 in the XC mode and compare the times at the end.
Let's talk about the whole downhill. We're talking a roughly 2-minute run, aren't we? A good mix of stuff, lots of roots, lots of rocks, and really kind of good test for the bike. But the transition bit in the middle of the run was around about 16 seconds. Yeah. Our section times for that were very consistent. So.
Yeah, there was hardly a second between us really on those.
Yeah.
Taking into account that section to sprint. And then obviously the one thing about it is you do have to then have that little moment to sort of like set the bike up for the next really slow tech.
So you drop onto fire road, put it into XC mode, sprint out the saddle, and then you would release it back into DH, and then you would have to compress the suspension just to kind of get it to sit back into the more relaxed geometry. So there's quite a few things you have to do during that short period of time. But actually, I found I managed to get it every single time. It wasn't too complicated to do.
No, I think like the position of the lever is in that position where you'd normally have that drop, so it's actually really easy to hit it.
I did my fastest time using the Shapeshifter on that one particular section. It was about half a second to 3/4 of a second faster using the Shapeshifter just for the 15-16 second fire road. So if we extrapolate that out, that's actually a really significant gain in that small period of time, and for no real risk, essentially. Because if you want to gain a second on a very technical, sort of rowdy descent, like, you've got to really commit.
You've got to be pushing it.
And the potential for crashing or whatever is really high. If you can save yourself a second on a short section of fire road, then that's
why would you not do that?
So I think there's a lot of potential for, depending on what the race stages are on an enduro race, you know, how they kind of pan out. If there's a long flat section or even an uphill in that stage, there is potential for easy gains using the system. So
I suppose any non-technical area. So, you know, even on a trail, if there's like a few flat turns but it's effectively a pedally section, that potentially will add to that as well.
That's the downhill section. Then we moved on to the climb, which I'm still feeling the heartburn now, I think.
Well, I heard you from the other end of the hill, I think, at one point. So it was hard. It's definitely like hard. There was a very, very sort of steep section, and it just kept getting steeper and steeper. So it's a real testament of how a bike rides.
Interesting results. Now, we did without the Shapeshifter first, and then with the Shapeshifter in the XC mode as the second run. And if it's faster, it's not because we're fresher in the second
that's
run.
it. It's like, you know, it's not a perfectly scientific test, but in terms of like trying to make it as fair as possible, it was probably the best way we could do it, really, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah. So how did it go for you?
Well, it was one of those sort of like situations that you finished both the runs absolutely hanging, but you didn't feel a huge amount of difference while you're actually riding. But when you saw the times, I had around about 14 seconds of difference.
Right.
So even though I used the Shapeshifter for the second run, as we said, so therefore potentially you're going to be a bit more fatigued, there was still 14 seconds faster using the Shapeshifter than not using the Shapeshifter.
That's a big good time gain over 3 minutes, isn't it?
It is. It is.
And mine was 13 seconds faster with the XC mode.
Yeah.
And like you say, it didn't feel faster because it felt like an age.
Yes.
But it felt more efficient. When I was kind of really trying to put the power down to get up that steep bit, that's when I could feel the additional anti-squat, and I could feel that the bike was moving forward more than my energy was being used to compress the suspension. So it just felt like all that energy was being translated into forward motion rather than kind of oscillating the suspension.
I noticed a little bit of difference in terms of geometry. So I have a slightly more aggressive climbing style, but what I did find was often without using the Shapeshifter, on the steep sections, you go to get those pedals and you can feel that the front lifting up each time you're doing it. But with the Shapeshifter, there was a little bit less of that. So I said it's just that a subtle amount of way it pitched you forwards made a huge difference, I felt, in terms of how it could get and cope with those like real steep sections.
Obviously, in an enduro race, you're not trying to get to the top as quickly as possible, but you're trying to do it with by using the least energy possible, aren't you? So you can get to the top in the same amount of time as someone using a bike without a Shapeshifter, let's say, with the same geometry and travel and stuff like that, but you can do it with less energy. So I think that's where the benefits lie in terms of racing or even riding with your mates. You're just saving energy, aren't you?
Yeah. I think that's the critical thing, is that in terms of like performance gains, it's a little bit less noticeable as in what the exact performance gains are. But as I said, as an overall concept, for an energy conservation point of view, then that just makes a huge amount of sense.
Yeah, I found it a really enjoyable bike to try and ride fast. Could really be precise and consistent with your line choice. You could just kind of let the bike do what it wanted, really. You didn't have to worry about the bike. You could concentrate on hitting those lines and sort of keeping your momentum going. And it was really playful as well. I think from that we can conclude that within the parameters of this test, that the Shapeshifter really did improve the enduro kind of experience in terms of like energy conservation, and B, potential for improving your times on the descents as well, if there are kind of flatter or climb sections on the timed stages. So there are definitely improvements to be had by using the Shapeshifter system. I think if I was racing, I would definitely be using it on stages and on transition kind of zones. So there you go, there's a little bit of insight into Canyon's Shapeshifter and the benefits that it can provide. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment below.